Hello, welcome to my little trip down road testing memory lane Q&A video for you today. How are we all doing? Thanks very much for all your questions and comments, especially from my last two videos. The one about the Nürburgring being closed for motorcycles for their tourist drives in 2025, which is a real shame. I think everyone's in agreement that it's a real shame, and also in agreement that perhaps it's a little bit dodgy and it was only a matter of time. Not everyone enjoys the ring, of course. Nobby Styles 4807 says it's probably a big deal for people that do bike reviews, but I'm 50 and have never been and never met anyone that's been, so 0 F's given. So not everyone's going to miss it. Also, interesting to get everyone's comments about Chinese bikes. Yeah, I'm not, or MCN or anyone's not pushing Chinese bikes. They're there, you can't ignore them, you still got to test them. And you know, the bikes themselves are getting better. But again, not everyone's a fan. Declan Argue 4571. All this tells me MCN is getting paid by FC Moto. So, yeah, I mean, yeah, the last Chinese bike we reviewed was the brace of CF Motos that were launched at Portimao a few weeks ago. I rode the 675 SRR, which is actually a really good bike. Also an adventure bike, and one of my colleagues, Chris, rode another adventure bike. And they are pretty good, you know, built down to a price, as is everything. Everything from a GS all the way down, everything's built down to a price, or affordable price. But yeah, it's an interesting debate that's going to rage on as Chinese bikes get even more popular. I've been on my travels. I went to the launch of the new Yamaha R9 a few weeks ago in Spain. It was a launch that almost didn't happen because we turned up on a Monday. Monday afternoon, we were in a hotel next to Jerez circuit, and it started to rain. Then it started to rain some more. Then it started to hail, and then it started to rain some more and more and more and more for hours and hours and hours. And it flooded the circuit, it flooded the local roads. At one point, the garages were under a metre of water. All the bikes were wet, all the mechanics' tools were wet. A lot of the photographers' camera equipment, video equipment was wet. The water had pulled a lot of the dirt onto the track, some of the gravel trap onto the track. It had knocked some of the tyre walls down. I mean, it was chaos for, you know, for some rain, with a lot of rain. And the low points of the track were flooded, and the high points were okay. And we couldn't do the launch the next day. We were supposed to ride on the road and track. So Yamaha very hastily reorganised the launch, and we went to the Seville circuit an hour up the road, which we did it all at last minute. So hats off to Yamaha for organising that. The weather still wasn't great. We got a couple of dry sessions before it started to rain, and we didn't get to ride on the road. But, you know, when you test these bikes, you don't just test them once anyway. You know, we're going to be riding the R9 extensively during the course of the year at MCN. My colleague Dan Sutherland has got one as a long-termer as well. No doubt be pitching it against my GSX-R750 at some point, but we'll have to see how that stacks up. I mean, I could tell you already, but I'd have to shoot you. So let's carry on with some questions. So this video really is kind of spurned on by this lovely viewer called Special Circus. Nisi, have you thought about splitting these thanks for asking sessions in two? One that is focused on road riding and one on track riding. I love what you do for MCN and the industry in general, but have no interest in track riding. And these days your videos are either all about track riding or tyre, setup, advice for racing like a knob on the road. I would wager that the majority of your viewers don't do track at all, although a majority of commenters do. Yeah, that's a fair point. Deal with a lot of track riding tips, track riding and all that kind of stuff, but that's the majority. It kind of the Q&As really just reflect the questions that are being sent. But yeah, let's do 100% track-free Q&A session, shall we? Hopefully no track stuff will creep in. So let's start with Goldfish 8196 Neves. Hope you're doing well. Yes, I am. Hope you are. I'm looking forward to your answer on the differences between the GSX-R600 and GSX-R750. I think you're kind of nudging me because you asked this question before. So sorry for not getting back to you sooner. In terms of handling, vibration and more. The 600 received more upgrades back in 2011 than the 750. Was it because of racing? I don't miss one of your videos. Thank you. You and MCN are the absolute best motorcycle channels on YouTube. Thank you very much. Well, thanks. Very nice of you to say. There are lots of other good channels as well. But yeah, MCN particularly very good. Yeah, it's an interesting one. So the GSX-R600 was last updated, I think it was 2010. Was it 11? I think it was 2010. Anyway, that got its last major overhaul in its life before it's discontinued in England at least, or UK and Europe at least. And Suzuki threw the kitchen sink at it. They gave it a brand new chassis, kind of lighter, stronger, more nimble. They worked on the engine. They gave it a lot of internal upgrades. And really the kind of driving force behind that was, I suppose, a throwback from 600s evolving at such a rapid pace every couple of years through the 90s and noughties. They were kind of on the end of that treadmill of improvement. And for racing as well. Although you never really used to see too many GSX-R600s in supersport racing, whether sort of world championship or regional or national. But yeah, Suzuki did a lot of work to it, and as a result of it, we rode it at Almeria and various group tests on track and on the road. It was always in the shadow. All of those bikes at that time were in the shadow of the Daytona 675, which really was kind of the best all-rounder. But the GSX-R definitely became the best of the rest. And if you didn't know it was a 600, you could be fooled into thinking it was a 750. Because it had so much grunt. It was so light, had so much grunt. It was fast. You know, we would have speed tested it back in the day at well over 160 mile an hour. And it was an absolutely great bike. And then a year later, or maybe the same year, I might have my dates confused, but definitely in 2011, the latest evolution of the GSX-R750 came out, the L1. And Suzuki did the same chassis mods to it, but they didn't go to town on the engine, probably because they didn't need to. The 750 didn't really ever have any competition. So it was a shame that they didn't go to town on the engine, because if they had have, the 750 would have been even better. It would have had even more grunt, even more appetite for revs, would have been even faster. Yeah, such a shame. But, you know, lots of 750s have been tuned in a similar way by tuning companies along the way. But again, why would you need to tune a 750? Because it's kind of got the best balance of power and handling anyway. And there are no real racing classes for it. Well, there weren't. There are now with the new generation Supersport rules. But anyone that races a 750 in these new generation rules has to have their power clipped anyway through balancing rules. So, yeah, the GSX-R750 was never really allowed to flourish. You know, I wish it had got those updates that the 600s had, but it didn't. But it's still an amazing bike, and I'm going to be doing a road test video on my 750 soon, because I've just had the suspension done. I'll tell you more about that in the next video. I've had it mapped, and I'm going to put some better brakes on it as well. Discs and pads. So really it should be perfect after that, but I'll keep you all in the loop. But thanks very much for your question. The next one is from Jeff Lambert 8603. This is the question all riders dread. At what point in life would you decide to stop riding motorcycles? Well, that's a question I'd throw out to everybody really. I suppose everyone's got their own kind of thoughts on it. I mean, personally, I'm going to keep going until I physically can't ride anymore. There's no reason to stop. You know, I've got sort of friends and family friends of their friends that have been riding bikes into their 80s. You know lots of racers that race when they're 70 in the classic racing, and you know, there's no reason to stop unless it becomes physically difficult, unless you can't kind of hold the bike up anymore. You know, some kind of illness, you know, unfortunately curtails your passion. But yeah, I don't think you should ever stop. I think it keeps people young. You know, you only have to go and visit a classic racing paddock or Goodwood Revival, and you see all the old boys on their Manx Nortons or whatever, and they've all got a glint in their eye. And it's amazing to see. And you just wouldn't have that glint in your eyes sitting down watching EastEnders every night, would you? So, yeah, keep going. But it'd be interesting to see what you all think about when you should stop riding bikes. But I say keep going. Keep on going. Next is from Sural89. What do you think of the ZH2 as a road bike? Interesting. So ZH2 is a supercharged 1000cc inline 4-cylinder naked Kawasaki. It came out in 2020. I did the launch of that at the Las Vegas NASCAR track, which was fantastic. We got to do the speed bowl, the banking, which, if you know, not many of us have ridden on banking before, but it's really surreal. It's very, very difficult. It looks quite easy on telly. Everyone's kind of tucked down and going, but you know, you've got a lot of G-force. It hurts your neck to try and see where you're going, and the speed's so close to the, you know, the edge of the banking. It's quite frightening. And then there was a handling course as well, and it's a great bike. You know, just like the H2SX that I had, which is basically a fared version of that. The engine is very, very smooth. The suspension is really plush. It's a really lovely, lovely bike to ride. Unfortunately, it doesn't kind of fit neatly into any category. You could say it's a cruiser because it's quite heavy. So you'd put it up against, say, a Diavel or something like that. But it's a little bit sportier than that. You could say it's a super naked, but you know, compared to a MT10 or a Super Duke or a Street Fighter or a Tuono, it's not sporty enough in terms of its handling because it's so heavy. So yeah, it's quite a quirky bike, but I think it's a very, very good bike. You know, the chirp from the supercharger when you come off the throttle, when you brake into a corner, is addictive. The ride quality is superb. But yes, it's kind of in a niche of its own, and because of that, it wasn't a bike we regularly tested at MCN, because normally when you kind of got a group of bikes, say the super nakeds, you'll test a bunch of super nakeds and a new one will come out. Rather than testing them all again to see how the new one compares, you basically just take the winner from that test and put it against a new one, and the test kind of evolves like that. But yeah, I think if you're thinking of getting one, go for it. I think you'll really, really like it. And those Kawasaki's are really nicely made. The paint finishes are nice. Just the way all the switches and the controls and the gearbox, everything's really smooth. Really, really nice bike. Maybe not the prettiest, but it's kind of handsome in its own brutal way. But yeah, let me know if you get one and what you think of it. Next is from GSX-R Nightman. And what do you think about the lack of riding gear on some YouTubers' channels? Getting called a Power Ranger for wearing full leathers seems like a terrible peer pressure to me. I live in Australia and wear them all year round, despite the heat. What are your thoughts on this important subject? Yeah, well, bike protection. There's nothing as good as full leathers with body armour. Maybe an airbag as well. You know, that's going to give you the ultimate in protection if you fall off. Abrasion resistance, bump resistance, and everything in between. And that's why MotoGP riders have the best of the best leathers. And if that's what you feel the safest in, that's what you should ride, and don't worry about what anyone else thinks. In terms of other YouTubers' channels, I mean, I don't watch the channels where the presenters are wearing substandard bike gear. Most of the stuff I watch, people are wearing decent bike gear because a lot of them kind of are sponsored by bike gear companies. But, you know, really motorcycling is about individual choice and freedom. Quite often I'll ride into town on my scooter in the summer in shorts and t-shirt and an open face crash helmet. But, you know, it's all about calculated risks and what you're willing to risk. You know, I know that if I fall off, I'm going to hurt myself in that scenario. So I'll cut the cloth to suit. I'll ride very, very slowly. And of course, that doesn't really preclude you from having an accident, but it is a calculated risk. And I kind of figure that riding my scooter around town isn't a lot faster than I'd ride my push bike. As soon as I go out of town, I would never wear shorts and t-shirts. I'd wear something more protective. For most of my riding, I wear jacket and jeans and an airbag. So I wear motorcycle jeans with armour, motorcycle boots, motorcycle gloves, proper jacket and everything in between. Now, that's not going to give me the ultimate in protection like leathers, but again, it's that kind of risk I'm willing to take, and it kind of does change the way I ride. You know, when you feel ultra safe, you do end up going a little bit faster. I mean, there is that argument as well. I mean, if you were to drive along in your car with a spike sticking out of the steering wheel, you would go really, really careful, wouldn't you? But if you've got a car full of airbags, then you feel a lot safer and you may drive differently. But in answer to your question, if you want to wear leathers, I'd say good for you. Don't worry about what anyone else thinks. Yeah, it's hot in Australia wearing leathers. I've done that many times, especially when I've been racing there. But yeah, getting hot is much better than gravel rush, isn't it? So yeah, keep on wearing those leathers. But thanks very much for your question. Next is from So Faking Crazy One. Hi Michael, in opposition to your answer about the MT10 being so ugly but a joy to ride, is there a motorcycle that's absolutely gorgeous and yet very poor to ride? Yeah, we were talking in the previous videos about kind of ugly bikes that are actually fantastic to ride. A lot of the Japanese nakeds aren't pretty, but a lot of them are great to ride, including the MTN. I mean, what a fantastic bike that is with a fantastic engine. In terms of bikes that are gorgeous, very poor to ride, you'd have to say MV Augustas. They're strange. They can be amazing bikes. They're very beautiful. They sound amazing. You know, they win lots of design awards at bike shows. They're kind of a poster bike for people. They're the Lamborghini, I suppose, of the motorbike world. But sometimes they're not very easy or pleasurable to ride. They can be a little bit clumsy. They're actually quite heavy. Sometimes the fueling can be poor. Sometimes the power delivery just isn't very fluid. It's kind of very choppy, very harsh. On occasions, sometimes you get very, very good ones and they're an absolute hoot. But I'd say in general, MVs are better to look at than to ride, unfortunately. And it kind of all really happened in the ride-by-wire era when the first F3 675 came out in 2012. The fueling just wasn't sorted at that point. And it did spoil the bike. And then as all the other MVs got ride-by-wire, they were similar. The modern ones aren't so bad, but they definitely went through a bit of a bad phase. And it's interesting to see what's happening with them at the moment, isn't it? Because now they're self-owned again after their tie-up with KTM. And I think since I've worked at MCN in nearly 23 years, they've never quite been plain sailing. They've had a lot of different owners, but they continue to make beautiful bikes, that's for sure. But thanks very much for your question. Next is from Cocky Potato. Thanks for the videos as always. Keep up the great work. Thank you very much. Now let me spare you for yet another what tyres should I put on my Multistrada if I never take it off-road or to the track and I'm a dentist sort of question. And let me ask you something fun. Who's your favourite MotoGP rider to watch and why? Not necessarily who you think's the absolute best, just the one you enjoy watch racing the most. I suppose this is a kind of a track question, but not a track riding question. Well, Well, I suppose if I could only take one video of a motorbike racer to my desert island cave, it's got to be Kevin Schwantz, 500 Grand Prix rider between 87 and 95. Short career, but his star shone very, very brightly. You know, everything about him, from his celebrations and his wheelies and his riding style and that gorgeous Pepsi paint job on his RGV 500 in 88 and 89, his Taichi leathers, his custom painted lid, it's just amazing. So yeah, I love watching him, and you know, like many of you, probably one of the reasons you got into motorcycles. You know, of that era, I used to really like John Kosinski on a 250. I think his style was amazing, like when he used to change direction and sort of do a crossed up wheelie as he was counter steering, changing wheel and changing direction was amazing. And Max Biaggi on a 250 as well back in the day was just amazing. In the modern era, I love watching Rossi, you know, especially the beginning of his MotoGP career, when he used to play with the other riders and just kind of ride with them for the best part of the race and then just clear off at the end of it. Much like somebody we know this year, having watched the Thai Grand Prix a couple of weeks ago. And in sort of current MotoGP, I love Viñales' riding style, that kind of really extreme, pick it up out the corner, hanging off with his knees right into the tank, but his body off the bike. I think that looks a fantastic style. I love Acosta, his riding style, the way he really V-lines into corners. You know, you can see it visibly on the TV, and if you can see it that visibly on the TV on the track, it must be insane. But of course, you can never get bored of watching Marquez. Marquez on a Honda, saving those front wheel slides, just lurid slides on his elbows, just incredible. You know, riding a bike that wasn't competitive towards the end of his Honda career. A bit like Schwantz, no one else could win on a Suzuki like Schwantz could. And actually Stoner as well. Stoner's just amazing to ride. He's that kind of early Pedrosa, Stoner, Viñales style, isn't he? Picking it up out the corners. But watching Marquez now, just so smooth and fluid on a bike that's the best on the grid. He's arguably the best rider on the grid. You know, I hope he doesn't make the racing boring this year, but you know, if he does what he did in Thailand, he won't be. But the other riders must be very, very worried. With Marquez in town, fit. I mean, Marquez probably didn't hurt himself last year, which is a stark contrast to every other year, and how broken that Honda made him. And he must be absolutely loving life now. You know, he's on the great bike. He's not injured. He looks like he's got a great life outside racing. So yeah, I never used to be a Marquez fan. I suppose most Rossi fans like me never used to like Marquez, but you know, you'd have to say he's the last of the aliens, and he is amazing to watch. Yeah, thanks very much for your question. Next is from WO388. Thanks for your question. With the launch of the R9 and the new Panigale V2 plus new supersport rules, what do you think the chances that we'll be seeing a Triumph Daytona again? Any chance of a Honda, Kawasaki, Suzuki doing a ground up new supersport? Seems like this and the small adventure bike segments are the two hottest at the moment. Really appreciate your insights as always. Thanks very much. Yeah, it's an interesting one, isn't it? It's definitely these kind of new generation supersport bikes seem to be flavour of the month, which is good. And I think manufacturers hope that they'll tempt some older sports bike riders back onto race reps. And I hope they hope they'll encourage newer riders maybe to sort of progress on from sports A2 bikes or bikes like the R7 onto the R9. There's no question that the small capacity adventure bikes are very, very popular. I don't think sports bikes will ever be as popular as that. I mean, they're still quite expensive. They're still relatively uncomfortable. You know, they're still quite risky because you've got to put all your weight over the front wheel. They're still relatively cramped because you need the ground clearance. So they're never going to be really, really comfortable. It'd be interesting to see if the other manufacturers follow suit, as you say. I mean, Triumph have got the Daytona 660. It'd be really nice to see 765 version of that bike. Whether Triumph have got the appetite to do it, I don't know. I remember being at the 675R launch, the last of that era, the last 675R they made actually. That was the end of 2012 for the 13 model. And it was all singing, all dancing and utterly brilliant. But I remember the engineers told me at the time that if they'd have started development maybe a year later on that bike, they wouldn't have bothered because they could see Supersport sales plummet. And there weren't any other Supersport bikes really from that time, were there? I don't know if they would spend all that money on development to make a Supersport bike. So if you think of the R9, it's basically an MT-09 with a different chassis and a few bits from an R1, and a few bits from an R6 or whatever. So it's not a completely new from the ground up bike in terms of development. You know, even the engine is basically exactly the same, bar some mapping tweaks. The Panigale V2 is kind of a modular concept. You know, it shares its engine with the Street Fighter V2 and the Multistrada V2 and whatever other model is going to come along later down the line. Can't see Honda doing a similar thing. Suzuki possibly. You know, they could dust off the GSX-R750, maybe give it a bit more capacity and make a sort of a comfortable supersport bike out of it. But I don't know. I just don't know. All the manufacturers would make MotoGP bikes if people bought them. But there's just not the market out there for big capacity sports bikes. You know, if you think the bulk of a manufacturer's sales is generally in Asia, where they more sell small capacity bikes. It's only kind of in the rest of the world where we want bigger bikes and, you know, the volume is quite low. So who knows? Who knows? I hope so. World would be a better place with more choice, wouldn't it? It'd be nice to see a full group of new generation supersport bikes. It would be a mouth-watering prospect. But thanks very much for your question. Next is from GSX-R Nightman. We have you before. Great content as usual. Have you any thoughts on new tyre prep? I wipe my new tyres with a damp rag of mineral turpentine followed by a dry rag to remove the slippery preserver before riding. I've known way too many riders to slide out on new rubber. What do you think? Do you think the shop should wipe tyres down before allowing someone to ride off on new rubber? One more quick question. Do you ever look at people's channels when they comment? I do it just to see if they're riding videos, especially if they are critical or seem knowledgeable. Good question. Yeah, so you're talking about brand new tyre. They generally got a kind of shiny coating on them when they're brand new, which some people say it's release compound. I think it is. I don't know exactly if that's the case, but it's some kind of coating, and it's very, very slippery. Very easy to crash on that. And indeed, my brother's got a tyre business, sells new and second-hand tyres, and he's probably had a good couple of dozen in his business career of bikes leaving his shop with the warning to be careful, and they've high-sided as soon as they've gone down the road. They've leant into the road from the side turning, given it some gas, and so you do have to be careful. But I don't know anything about wiping tyres with a rag of mineral turpentine. I've never seen anybody do that, and we've been around tyre companies, tyre launches, tyre manufacturers testing tyres, doing our own tyre tests. We'd never ever do that. And I don't really think if you think about riding on them, it is a problem. You can get rid of that shiny coating within a couple of revolutions of the tyre. So in a straight line, if you get on your bike, within 100 yards, you would have got the slippery stuff off that bit of the tyre. And then it's just a question of carefully leaning over to get rid of the slippery stuff off the rest of the tyre. So, you know, you probably only need to do half a dozen or so revolutions on that bit of the tyre, and you get rid of the slippery stuff. A bit more, you get rid of it, get rid of it, get rid of it. And of course, you can't just absolutely go for it once you've got rid of the slippery stuff, because you've also got to warm your tyres up, as you would do anyway. So I just think it's a question of being careful. The manufacturers before used to say, you know, go careful for 50 miles or whatever, and they'd only put that kind of figure on that kind of running in period, because at that point you probably would have leant over enough on that tyre left and right to kind of clean it off, so to speak. But you can do it in a very short amount of time. When we're doing tyre tests on the road, it only takes a couple of corners to get rid of that shiny stuff. If you're very, very careful the first time you start leaning over. On a racetrack, quite often you put brand new tyres on before a race, and it takes all of 2 or 3 corners really to get rid of the shiny stuff. And it's the same, imagine riding through some mud. You've got muddy tyres, and if you were to follow someone with a muddy tyre, you see them lean over and you'd see that tyre cleaning off each time they leant over. And it doesn't need re-cleaning. Once you've done a few revolutions on that tyre, it's fine, you know, and then you can go for it as long as your tyre is up to temperature. So yeah, I wouldn't bother with that. And you run the risk, if you put some kind of chemical or whatever on your tyre, there's a chance you could kind of destroy or at least spoil the molecular structure of it all, because you know that tyre is just a big chemical cake mix, and if you put something else on there, you know, who knows what's going to happen, and that might cause further problems anyway. So I think it's kind of an answer to a question that doesn't really exist. Do I look at other people's channels when they comment? I mean, not generally, unless they're really nasty comments, which I've got to say they very rarely happen on this channel. Which is really good, because I think I've got a very knowledgeable, kind, caring audience. It does a lot on MCN, because I think people find MCN because they're looking for a particular bike to be reviewed, you know, as well as the subscribers and the MCN video channel fans. They're normally the same as this channel. People are level-headed and quite decent. But when you get people that have found a video and then they criticise it in quite an ugly way, it's quite interesting to go onto their channel and see what they normally look at, see how many followers they've got, see how many videos they've put on. I mean, generally people that criticise never create themselves. It's just quite easy just to throw mud at other people, isn't it? So, but generally the people that criticise aren't really worth spending a lot of time on, as is the case in normal life. But great question, thank you very much. Right, this one is from Just for Rita. I've asked this question a long time ago and you never had it on your videos. Apologies. Chain cleaning, what do you use and how often do you do it? I also have an M endurance chain. Do you believe in the selling point of a chain that doesn't require lubrication? I'm skeptical. Well, the thing with modern motorcycle O-ring chains is that the lubrication comes from within the grease in the O-rings. So theoretically, you don't actually need to lube it. And the M chain has kind of got Teflon coating and all the rest of it, which in theory you don't need to clean, but obviously it's going to get dirty. So you do need to clean it in some way. Or actually, you don't need to lubricate it as such. You still need to clean it. But what I do, I'm an OCD chain cleaner. When I've ridden my bike, I'll wipe the chain off after a ride anyway. So I usually use GT85, just to stop all the links going rusty. So if I'm in a position to clean it regularly, wipe it down after every ride, I'll just do that. And my chains, like, it's only anecdotally, I mean, I can't say this for real, but I very rarely need to adjust my chain. They don't stretch, you know. Dirt makes the chain stretch because it's just like grinding paste when it gets in there. And the chains always stay in really good condition. When I have my long-term test bikes, I probably may adjust the chain once during the long-term test bike's life, and that's it. If I'm on a long tour, it's slightly different, because you know, you're not always going to get the chance to clean the chain. You're going to get caught in bad weather and all the rest of it. So I'll normally clean the chain before I go on a long trip, and then give it a good old coating with chain lube, and just wipe it off if I get the chance, and re-lube it when I'm on the road. But generally that's what I do with chain cleaning. And I know there's loads of videos about chain maintenance and chain cleaning, from kind of Fortnite to Bennett's, and they're all really, really interesting. But you know, my own experience racing and road riding, I just use GT85 and just keep on top of it basically. But it'd be interesting to hear what you guys think of chain cleaning. Thank you very much. This one's from Will Parish. Michael, are there any nice roads or routes left that you know of in Kent? Thanks for your question. Well, yeah, I'm a Kent boy. Grew up in Margate and Ramsgate, and we used to kind of stay relatively local when we used to go out for rides. You know, the Wingham Bends near Canterbury, down to Rye, Tenterton, Ashford Way. You know, I used to think there were some half decent roads down there, but really, you know, as time's marched on, the roads have become much busier, and I don't know of any really good roads in Kent that kind of last for any decent length of time. But since I've moved to where I am, near Peterborough, the roads up here are fantastic. And, you know, we've got what people call the Rutland TT around here, which kind of does a kind of a big, massive kind of loop around Stamford that, you know, would take about half a day, 3/4 of the day to ride. And then sort of coming north from here, the Peak District and Wales and Scotland or whatever, you know, the roads get better as you get further north, really, because it's a bit hillier, it's a bit less populated. But in terms of roads in Kent, no. But I would say if you want a road that's close to Kent, that's really good, get yourself on the Channel Tunnel crossing, pop yourself out at Calais and ride down to Le Touquet. And the coast road from Calais to Le Touquet is fantastic. Can get a bit busy in the summer and at weekends, but if you were to go in the week, or, you know, take an early crossing to get there, the road there is brilliant. And you know, it winds along the coast. You can see the White Cliffs of Dover from where you're riding. There's Wimereux, which is a nice little town where you can get a coffee on the way. And Le Touquet is fantastic. You know, an overnight stay in Le Touquet. It's a really lovely town. It's like Beverly Hills when you ride in. Just the palm trees and the buildings and the posh shops. Then there's loads of nice restaurants and bars and cafes, and it's on the seafront. So yeah, that's where I would go if I lived in Kent. I'd go to France. Thanks very much for your question. Next, and it's the last one, you'd be glad to know. It's from Jim Marshall, 807. Guzzis love. I'm biased being a Guzzis fan, but after initial launch tests, they seem to vanish off the road test radar. Retro tests include Triumph 7fields and the Japanese bikes, but not the V7. While sports tourer tests focus on the Japanese, Kawasaki and Suzuki's in particular, plus the two Tonic bikes, but not the Mandello. Characterful, capable, well-built bikes that often have deals on them. Is it just me, or is there a reason for this? Well, no reason, no conspiracy theories. Like I said before, we always test every single new bike, both short-term and long-term. Quite often we get long-term tests. We initially include every bike in a group test, but then as group tests evolve, the bikes that aren't the winners don't get tested again. So quite often bikes don't get as many bites at the cherry as some other bikes. So that's one of the reasons that kind of Guzzis and Aprilias as well don't feature in that many group tests. And the other reason is just a simple logistical problem. It's not as easy to get a Guzzis or Aprilia press bike when you want it as it is some of the other bikes. So it's just a question of availability as well. You know, quite often we have problems getting bikes from some manufacturers, and they end up not appearing in group tests. And you know, you can't use owners' bikes really. You can't use dealer bikes really, because you know, we put too many miles on them when we do the tests. So we're kind of beholden to manufacturers and importers, and sometimes those bikes just aren't available. But there's no reason for it. I love Guzzis. I love that Mandello. I've only ridden it once at the launch. You know, I'd love to have ridden it again. And the same with Aprilias. I don't ride my favourite 2.0 as much as I'd like either, although there's a new one this year and a new RSV4. So that's the reason. That's it for this video. Next week's video, we're going to take my GSX-R750 to get some suspension love. So stay tuned for that one. But thanks very much for watching this one, and I'll see you soon.